Hi, everyone. I'm so proud to present the latest book on the block, Sleeping Like a Baby. This is the book that answers that $1 million question: how do we get our babies to sleep? And it answers the question by honoring the evolutionary and biological needs of mom and baby. In other words, this is a book that does not make sleep a site of deep distress and violence. Rather, it ensures that sleep is associated with proximity and warmth and gentleness. I have with me today the authors who have written this exceptional book, Himani Dalmia and Neha Bhatt. I'm going to introduce both of them to you. Himani and Neha have been pole stars in my parenting journey. They have been friends. They have been well-wishers. I have relied greatly on the exceptional Facebook page, Gentle Baby Sleep India. And equally, I found so much in this book. Himani Dalmia is a La Leche League leader, and she is an Australian certified pediatric sleep expert. Neha Bhatt is an award-winning journalist who writes for a number of Indian and international publications on a range of subjects from public health to education. It's such a pleasure to have both of you in conversation with me. I'm Dharini. I'm the author of These Are Bodies Possessed by Light, a novel, and I'm also an ardent advocate of natural parenting. So this book spoke very, very deeply to me. Neha and Himani, great to have you here.
It's great to be here, Dharini, and in conversation with someone who is as passionate as us about baby sleep. We're so delighted to be chatting with you.
And how can we not be passionate about the subject, right? Yeah.
Yeah, we definitely feel that way. I think once someone catches the bug, there's no turning back. Once you actually get what like baby sleep is all about, there's no turning back from there.
I agree. And so I'm going to start with the most obvious question at this point. Take me through your personal journeys through that fraught landscape called baby sleep. Neha and Himani both. Himani,
Sure.
you could start and Neha can take over from there.
Yeah.
Well, Neha, why don't you start, because Sahir is older than my babies, so let's go chronologically in that case.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. So, of course, like most parents believe in the first couple of months, we thought we had a unicorn baby. And soon after we came back from the hospital, Sahir was doing 4 to 5 hours of sleep at night, uninterrupted. And we thought, wow, we've got $1 million baby. And then came the 4th month regression, and he began to wake up every half an hour, and I wondered where we had gone wrong. And that's really when I began to research baby sleep. And but unfortunately, everything I found online led us to sleep training. And we came across a friend who recommended sleep training to us. We tried sleep training in the sense that we tried putting our baby down in the cot and let him fall asleep on his own for about half an hour. That's how long it lasted, because it just made no sense to us. It just seemed counterintuitive. And that's where my journey began, to just hold my baby close all the time. And he began to fall into an age appropriate routine. And that's when I began to, really read up more and more about what biological appropriate sleep really is. And then a year later, I met Himani again, who is a friend from school, and we got talking about baby sleep, and that's how we started Gentle Baby Sleep India. Himani, what about you?
Yeah, so when my first daughter Devika was born 6 years ago, it was a sort of similar story. The first 3 or 4 months, you really feel like, oh, you've got this. Like, this is not so hard. What are people talking about? It's not that difficult. Yes, of course, the big shock in the initial months for a lot of parents, and for me as well, was that I couldn't put my baby down. So the second I would put her down, she would wake up. And of course, you learn very quickly that the answer to that is obvious: just don't put the baby down, right? But it's just that society hasn't prepared you for this. So you feel like something is not, like, how can this be? Like, how is it that I can't put my baby down? why does nobody talk about this? But then the more I kind of researched this and read up on it, and just honestly just observed my baby, I realized that I actually could not put her down. And as long as I held her, she slept beautifully and for long stretches. So it was really, when she turned, so when she was about 3.5 months old, she was doing these beautiful long stretches of sleep, 6-7 hours. I would wake up in a pool of milk and a little bit of panic and check on her and be like, oh my God, is she okay? And of course she was fine. But when she was 4 months old, she started waking up every hour in the night. And then I would find myself awake at night with this very awake baby and, frantically Googling 4-month-old not sleeping. That opened up this whole Pandora's box. This coincided with a visit by a family friend from the US who gave me my very first baby sleep book. It was an excellent book, though, yes, it did have a slight sleep training slant to it, but it at least opened my eyes to the fact that there is a science to baby sleep and there's more to it than meets the eye. And soon after this, I reconnected with Neha and we discovered that we were equally passionate about baby sleep. And then, there was no turning back, because I just started reading more and more. I started realizing that I need to observe my own baby, and that things that I am reading, with a sleep training perspective, or things that others are telling me, may not actually be the truth, and that I need to question this. And so with that questioning and with that observation, I realized that there's actually a whole other universe of baby sleep. And then when we co-founded Gentle Baby Sleep India, we met other like-minded parents, and we exchanged notes. Of course, the whole the subject opened up much more. Along the way, I decided to study it formally, and I did. Then I also had my second daughter, Yamini. So it was like, going through it all once more and kind of consolidating my knowledge on it. But here we are, 6 years later, and very happy to have, worked with 50,000 plus members on Gentle Baby Sleep India, advised several hundreds now professionally, and exchange notes with this fabulous team of admin moms and other passionate moms like you, Dharini, on Gentle Baby Sleep India, which have honestly been larger than any kind of focus group could have been. And larger than several control groups in medical studies as well, because we've observed like 30-40 babies at such close quarters. So anyway, here we are now.
It's really interesting hearing both your journeys, because what comes through very clearly is that our babies need touch constantly, especially in the early years. They're wired that way. They need contact. I remember before I gave birth to my baby, before I even conceived, this had been my dream. I thought that I'd be working until the day I delivered. I'd return to work a week later. I'd carry my baby, breastfeed him on demand, and then pop him into a bassinet. He'd sleep for hours, and I'd continue editing manuscripts while he slept. As it happened, life took a different turn. But as it happened, I also realized that there was no chance that my baby would sleep for hours uninterrupted in a bassinet. It just didn't happen. It never did. Himani, tell me what it is that makes our babies so very contact dependent.
Yeah, so this is a great question. And it's, one of the first things that parents encounter when they become parents. So the thing is that, human babies are born very early in the gestation process. When we evolved from being quadrupeds to being bipeds, from walking on 4 legs to walking on 2 legs, our pelvis became very narrow. And human babies have a very large head relative to the rest of their bodies, because it houses the large human brain. Now, in order for the large head of a human baby to fit through the narrow pelvis of a biped, the baby had to be born very early in the gestation process. So research theorizes that a human pregnancy would actually need to be 18 to 21 months long for human babies to be born at the same level of maturity and independence as most other mammal babies. So human babies are born at a stage where they're actually not ready to be out of the womb as yet for almost the entire first year, which means that they need that womb-like comfort. And what is the womb? The womb is the safe, dark place where a baby doesn't feel any hunger, any pain. There is no risk of any kind, no danger. There's no separation from the mother, right? They are one being. And when they come and when the baby comes out, and we have these beautiful nurseries set up for them. I mean, for them, it may as well be a Las Vegas casino. They're out, there are lights and sounds. They have to now ask to be fed. Poo and pee is not miraculously cleaned up. They feel gas pain, they have to be burped, and they can be separated from the thing that was keeping them alive, which is their parent. Now they have a survival instinct that prevents this from happening, that prevents this separation from happening, because they realize that their survival depends on the parent. Of course, all of this is not conscious thought, it's inbuilt, it's programmed into the baby. So, if you think about prehistoric babies, imagine, millions of years ago, imagine that there were two babies and both fell asleep. And, the first baby was placed under a bush to sleep, and that baby just kept sleeping, didn't wake up. The second baby, you put that baby under the bush to sleep. That baby woke up, screamed, cried, wanted to be picked up again. Now, which of these two babies would be at a higher risk of being picked up by a predator or being left to starve? The first baby, right? And it's the second baby that would actually have a higher rate of survival and would win the game of evolution, survival of the fittest, etc. So it's the second baby who actually survived all of these millennia. And our babies today have that same biological programming. They don't know that they're safe in a home in Delhi or Gurgaon or Bangalore or, in Singapore or Atlanta for that matter, right? For them, they may as well be in the wild. And they have that same biological programming that makes them panic and a sort of red alert go off if they're separated from a caregiver. So they're biologically programmed to have that kind of reflex reaction. Babies are very vulnerable when they're sleeping, and so it's heightened all the more when they're asleep, which is why they need a lot of contact to sleep well. They need to feel safe and secure. They need to feel the warmth. It's an extension of the concept of skin to skin, right? Or kangaroo mother care. The idea is that the baby feels very safe and secure if the baby can feel the heartbeat, feel the warmth, smell the mother, smell the milk. But, in the early stages, especially, any caregiver will actually do, any loving caregiver, as long as they feel that warmth and security. So initially, it's all about holding and physical contact and, keeping the baby on your chest and, making your baby feel completely connected to you, or baby wearing even. And then as the baby grows older, as the first year progresses, one can kind of graduate from this into lying next to the baby, and not necessarily holding the baby up, but still being very close to the baby and, having that physical contact while bed sharing or lying next to the baby.
That's such a good answer. And I think it's such an important introduction to how our babies work. You use a lot of words that I think are very important. For instance, kangaroo care, for instance, touch, for instance, even baby bearing. And the more you read about the subject and the more time you spend with a child, the more you discover how all of this is connected. There is a connection between baby wearing, bed sharing, breastfeeding. Now, we live in strange times in that there has been a backlash as well against all of this. There is a belief sometimes that this goes against the tide of feminism, that being in constant contact with a child, nurturing a child for long hours is not feminist. I know your book touches on the subject and it does a really masterful job of engaging with it. But Neha, can you tell me why, in your view, offering gentle sleep options to a baby is not unfeminist?
Right. we live in strange times because while women are going out to work more and more, there is also this deeper understanding of the needs of our children, and they somehow tend to clash. In the sense that children do need caregivers, whether it's their mother or father. But in the initial few months and even the first few years, the mother plays almost an irreplaceable role. But at the same time, people believe that if you step out to, if you become a stay-at-home mother, or that if you choose to breastfeed your child for longer than, say, the first 6 months, somehow you are putting the child's needs before yours. And there is this misunderstanding that feminism really means putting your own needs before everyone else's. In what we argue in the book is that it is the kind of needs that children have in the first few years is only a temporary phase. So if you are actually putting your career on pause for a moment, whether that's the mother or the father or another caregiver, it doesn't mean that it's going to be like that all your life. It's just about actually building a support system where you see that the child's needs come first before anyone else's in the family. So it's really the mother also guiding the entire family to rally around her, to provide the child with all the support that he needs in the first few years. And whether that means the mother has to go back to work after 4 months or 6 months or a year, or even after a few years, that's absolutely her choice. But that doesn't take away from the fact that the child's needs remain the same. Your career plans don't really change the needs of the child's. Those needs stay the same. And what you really need to do is to build that support system around you that can support your choices.
That's such an important answer, right? Because we often tend to think that a child's needs can be tweaked, that they aren't really cast in stone, that that it's a little being, it can adjust. But very often these are the beings that struggle most to adjust. And your book really brings that to our attention. What your book also does, and one of the underpinnings of your book has been the belief that it's important to bed share. And this again goes against a lot of medical advice we find floating around online, especially in the West, but increasingly even here. And I remember soon after I birthed my child, one of the first things I was told was that it isn't safe to bed share, that I could crush my child if I slept by his side. It's devastating when you hear such advice, because it makes you feel as though your own body is lethal, when in fact it isn't. Tell me something. Why is it that you believe that bed sharing is safe? It isn't unsafe like we read otherwise. It actually is a very safe practice. Himani.
Right. So, bed sharing has been practiced for millennia. It's the way animals sleep. It's the way chimpanzees or primates, right? Chimpanzees, apes, gorillas, our closest cousins in the animal kingdom, they all sleep tucked up. Babies tucked up with their mothers. Human beings have also bed shared for almost their entire existence, apart from perhaps the last 200 or so years. And even today, bed sharing is practiced in most of the world. It is only not practiced in some countries, in some industrialized nations, largely in the West. So in Eastern countries, in fact, where bed sharing is the norm, in Japan, in Hong Kong, in Thailand, in Korea, in India, the rates of SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome, are actually the lowest. So, so there is clearly a sort of misunderstanding about bed share, about SIDS, what causes SIDS, how one can safely bed share. And the fact is that not only is bed sharing biologically normal, it's actually really good for the baby and also for the mother. So it boosts the breastfeeding relationship for one. Human milk has a very low calorie composition, which is specially designed for the human infant's underdeveloped gut. And this means that human infants actually need to feed very frequently. So bed sharing facilitates that. The mom is able to feed frequently at night without completely exhausting herself, and by responding to the baby very quickly. This kind of keeps her supply up, and also reassures the baby that his or her need to feed will always be fulfilled. So it boosts the breastfeeding relationship. Babies sleep better. Mothers also report more sleep, more continual sleep. And interestingly, a lot of research recently, and especially a lot of research done by Professor James McKenna at the Mother Baby Behavioral Sleep Laboratory at the University of Notre Dame in the US, who is really the father of biologically normal infant sleep. And we're so honored that he has written the foreword for our book. So a lot of the research by Professor McKenna actually showed that breastfeeding isn't just normal, it isn't just, not dangerous or just convenient. It's actually beneficial. It actually helps the baby develop. Bed sharing with the mom acts as a sort of incubator for the baby. So the mother's breathing, heart rate, smell, warmth actually contribute to the baby's development. So even the maternal movement and touch, they reduce crying. It helps the baby to regulate breathing, heart rate, absorption of calories, stress, oxygenation, and much more. Mother and baby sleep cycles also synchronize if they bed share. And also babies practice rousing and staying in light sleep, which is actually protective against SIDS. So bed sharing actually has several benefits. I mean, I know it's ironic we call it benefits because it's actually that it's just the norm, and not bed sharing has certain risks. But since we're looking at it from the perspective of, is it okay to bed share? It's not only okay, but it has several benefits attached.
That's really interesting to hear. And when you mentioned Dr. James McKenna, whose foreword in your book is, like you say, such a revelation, he almost describes in magical real terms how mothers and babies are physiologically entwined. And for anyone buying this book, one of the first things I'd ask you to do is dive deep into McKenna's foreword, because it really sets the tone for everything that is to follow. Neha, tell me, so your book, of course, foregrounds the need for physical proximity with the baby, for the need to, share sleep with the baby, for the need to hold the baby close while it drifts into sleep. But at the same time, it also honors the baby's biological clock. A lot of babies are wired similarly in the way their bodies seek sleep and in their cycles. And your book offers a detailed overview of how this works and how this progresses across sleep progressions/regressions down the ages. One question that used to occur to me in the early days was this: why is it that I need to help my baby fall asleep, assist my baby through the process of falling asleep? And why can't I just let him fall asleep as and when he gets tired? When he's overtired, he will fall asleep at some point, whether it's at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. Why do I have to assist him with the process? Neha?
Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, it's something that's asked very often on our group. And it's important to understand that falling asleep is a developmental skill. It isn't something that can be taught like, you teach a child how to read or write. It's something that comes on its own in its own time. So just like you can't teach a child of say 2 months or 3 months how to walk, you can't teach a 2-month-old or a 4-month-old or even a 1-year-old to fall asleep on his or her own. falling asleep is something that babies do when they feel safe and secure. So when you expect a child to fall asleep on her own, you basically are expecting for her to do something that she isn't developmentally ready for, and B, for her to actually fall asleep without that safety and security that actually comes by holding a child or lying down next to a child or rocking or walking a child to sleep. So babies, in fact, learn the skill of falling asleep on their own without active soothing around the age of 2 to 3. So it's closer to the age of 3, in fact, 3.5, that you'll notice that sometimes your baby might fall asleep, on her own if you just lie down next to her. But a baby of 2 or 3 months will need that bridging that at that exact window when he's ready to fall asleep, and you see him drowsy when just lull it, he lulls to sleep as you hold him or rock him or walk him. And that is in fact where many parents believe that, if I put my child to sleep now, he'll probably just fall asleep on his own, and he'll probably be able to do this each time I put him down. And that's exactly where you lose that sleep window, because parents tend to misunderstand that as learning independence. When in fact children and babies need that help because they are not developmentally ready, their brains are still immature, and they do not yet have that skill to be able to fall asleep on their own, and be also bridge sleep cycles. So you see that the same way that children are helped to sleep by active forms of soothing, which could be either nursing, walking, rocking, holding, the same methods will be required to help a child bridge sleep cycles, which basically means that when a baby stirs, you help the baby go back to sleep.
That's really useful to know, and it also flies in the face of a lot of sleep training advice that floats around online and elsewhere. I want both of you to answer this. Why is it that sleep training isn't the answer to the riddle that is baby sleep? Himani can go first, and then Neha.
Yeah. So, first I'd like to clarify what this term sleep training means. Because actually, because sleep training is not very pervasive in India, when a lot of parents refer to even what we advise on Gentle Baby Sleep India as sleep training, so we'll get a question saying, I want to start sleep training my baby. So no, so what we advise on Gentle Baby Sleep India and in our book and in my professional counseling as well is sleep management and what I like to call sleep parenting. So it's more about understanding the baby's biology and using some very powerful tools to actually help your baby sleep. But the term sleep training traditionally refers to inculcating something called self-soothing in the baby. And it's a practice that is very popular in the West, and it's actually a multi-million-dollar industry. There are sleep trainers, sleep clinics, sleep training books, apps, websites, and much more. And the idea here, traditionally it was called cry it out sleep training, where the idea was that if the baby wakes and calls out for you, or even while the baby is falling asleep, if the baby cries, which the baby will cry because the baby needs your help to fall asleep, you just let the baby cry. So you close the door and you sit outside and you wait for the baby to cry herself to sleep. This is the traditional kind of cry it out sleep training. Over the decades, this has now been repackaged in all kinds of ways, right? So now we have several variations to this. One will encounter methods where you just sit next to the baby, or you go in every 5 minutes to check on the baby, or you can use your voice but not your touch, or you can use your touch but you can't pick up the baby. And then there are all kinds of terms that have been developed, like responsive settling, or the shuffle method, or controlled crying. And the attempt is to make it sound more gentle and less based on crime. But all of these methods of sleep training have the same essence, which is that we're trying to make the baby independent before her time. We're trying to get the baby to self-soothe or self-settle. Now, the fact of the matter is, as Neha said, self-settling and self-soothing is a developmental skill. It cannot be taught to a baby. Babies do not have a developed prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that is actually responsible for self-regulation, and babies cannot fall asleep on their own. So what we are in fact doing is that we're conditioning the baby to learn that crying as a signal does not work. So it's not that the baby is not distressed. It's not that the baby is not waking up at night, but the baby has learned that when I cry, nobody will come. There are studies that have shown that babies still wake at night, and if you test their cortisol levels, their stress levels are incredibly high, but they're not calling out to the parent. Now, this has been associated with all kinds of mental health risks, including infant trauma, because you're basically tampering with a baby's developing coping mechanism. And instead of a baby genuinely learning how to soothe herself, which would in fact come from the feeling of being soothed repeatedly by a caregiver and a feeling of emotional safety, what you're actually creating are connections in the brain that make the baby go into fight or flight every time the baby considers herself to be abandoned or in danger. So sleep training, this is what sleep training usually does. It's very stressful for both parents and babies. Parents find it to be very counterintuitive, but they somehow feel that they need to go ahead with it in any case, that it's some kind of rite of passage that all parents have to go through. And very often sleep training needs to be repeated after every sleep regression or every new developmental need that the baby has. So it's a sort of quick and dirty fad diet type solution, which is very harmful and is not really the sleep parenting or the lifestyle change that we advocate.
I couldn't agree more. Neha, would you like to add anything to that?
I just wanted to add that I think there is this huge misunderstanding and misconception that a lot of parents have, that if they don't sleep train, that means they are letting the baby sleep when it wants and wake when it wants, which kind of is very difficult to handle after a point, because then if you don't follow a routine, things can tend to become very chaotic. And the answer to not sleep training is not letting the baby sleep wherever and whenever. As we discussed some time ago, children don't have the ability to fall asleep on their own, and often they fall asleep out of exhaustion, because parents think that they'll fall asleep whenever they have to. And unfortunately, what happens is that they just get overexhausted, and then the body just shuts down in order to conserve energy. And sleep training, in a sense, also builds on this on this particular thing where children just sleep out of exhaustion. So parents believe that the child has fallen asleep on her own, but actually the child is so exhausted from the crying that the body essentially shuts down. And sleep training, as Himani said, it's just it needs to be done again and again. And very often we find parents telling us that they sleep train their child, and yet the child comes into the parents' bed at 2 or 3 in the morning, or that the child very often resists bedtime because the child knows that now he or she will have to be alone in a room. So there are several behavioral problems that begin to crop up once the child comes into the toddler stage and begins to develop a personality of his or her own. And that's when you begin to see the ill effects of sleep training, which parents often misunderstand to be something else, and they don't connect it to sleep training. But actually, sleep training, leads to major behavioral issues later, which I think is very concerning to us, because we see that sleep training is becoming more and more popular in India as well, and that should concern us all.
I'm glad you mentioned the behavioral issues that crop up, especially around toddlerhood, because what we often tend to forget is there is such a thing as nighttime parenting, that for the 10 or 12 hours that a child is sleeping, we are still parenting. When we're sleeping by the side of a child, we are still parenting, and we are giving him the trust and security he needs so that he can confront the next day. So that is something that we should, I think, always remember, because there is a tendency to view sleep as, nothing time. It's not nothing time. It's actually deeply restorative. And it is a time when I think connections are built and rebuilt. Neha and Himani, your book tackles a number of very important practical questions head on in your book. For instance, you tell parents how they are to navigate that tricky terrain when in-laws or various relatives tell them how they are to meet their children's sleep needs. Your book tells parents how they are to honor a child's sleep needs if they have social obligations, weddings, or if a child has to start preschool. Your book also tells parents how they are to help their children sleep if they happen to be working outside the home. And for all these reasons, apart from so much else, I think this book is such an important one for parents, new parents, expecting parents, everyone really. Now, speaking of practical advice, we received a lot of very interesting, some practical questions from members of your Facebook group, Gentle Baby Sleep India. I've selected a few of them, and I'm going to ask them to you. And so we'll start with Christina's question. She says, until what age is co-sleeping considered the best choice for the child? Is there a risk that it will disrupt their sleep as they get older? Some studies are saying so I want to confirm. This is a question that a lot of parents ask, right? Till what age am I allowed to bed share? Till what age is it all right for a toddler to sleep with the parent? At what point do I start fostering independent sleep? Neha, would you like to answer this question?
Sure, absolutely. Before I answer this question, I just want everyone to take a moment to think about the fact that would you be okay sleeping on a different sleeping surface from, say, your partner? Or when you were younger, what are your memories of sleeping with your parents? Did you ever think rooming in or bed sharing with your parents was actually detrimental to your relationship? And now coming back to the present, I would say that children typically do require some kind of parental presence in the bed till the age of 4 to 5. But this again is a range. I mean, there are children who may be ready to sleep in their own room by maybe 3 or 4. It could be 8 or 9 for others, or maybe even 10 to 11. So I would say this varies from child to child. At the center of it is the question, is your child ready to sleep separately? I think it's important to acknowledge the child's need for closeness and connection, no matter what the age is. And it's also important not to force your own expectations of a child sleeping separately, or forcing that expectation on your baby. I think it's very important to have these conversations with your child when he is at a stage where he understands separate spaces, and maybe he enjoys playing in his room during the day, or has his own playroom which is separate from your bedroom, and that may be a stepping stone towards having his own room someday. But again, this is something that's a very personal question for every family to ask themselves. And there is absolutely nothing wrong if you continue to bed share with your baby well beyond what you thought it would be. And it's absolutely normal for a 7 or an 8-year-old to want to cuddle up with his parents. So you have all the permission you need to bed share with your child for as long as you like. But yes, parents do ask us very often that we'd like to have a separate sleeping surface. We'd like the child to be independent. Again, there are steps to it. There are gentle transitions that can be done. starting with maybe helping a child nap in a separate room, and then moving on to the night sleep also happening in that room. And other ways of transitioning is, of course, the parents sleeping with the child in their room for a few days or months, even as long as the child needs to feel safe and secure in his own sleeping space.
No, that's a great answer. And there is also the fact that I don't know too many 18-year-olds who sleep with their parents. So there will be a point sooner or later when your child will claim his own space. We don't have to rush them through the process. Now, Diksha wants to know, my husband wants to be more involved with putting the baby to sleep and calming her during the witching hours. But he doesn't know how he can involve himself when the baby only wants mum. I would like some tips. This is a burning concern, particularly when there is a breast sleeping relationship involved, where the child is breastfeeding to sleep. How does the other caregiver, the other partner, involve himself with the process of putting a baby to sleep? Himani?
Yeah, so, we don't know the age of the baby in this particular case, but since she refers to witching hours, I'm assuming that it's a newborn or young infant, right? So the thing is, I mean, of course, the best case scenario is that the co-parent should be involved from the very beginning, right? So that the baby has that association with multiple caregivers. The co-parent should also do a lot of skin to skin with the baby and develop that bond. So that is, of course, the ideal scenario. The other thing I would ask the parents to consider is, how bad is this witching hour? And is the baby overtired? Is the baby well rested through the day? Because it's very, very common for babies to be extra clingy and extra fussy and have a very strong parent preference if they are overtired and if they actually haven't had enough sleep during the day. They're much better at coping with different situations, at regulating their own emotions if they are well rested, and they're much better at adapting to change. So this is and it's very common for babies to actually be overtired and not be well rested and therefore unable to cope with this change, which we as parents may not realize is actually what is happening. But okay, let's assume that all of that is in place, right? And even so, the baby has a very strong mum preference, right? The thing is that it would be a misunderstanding to think that if a baby is breastfeeding, the baby is not going to adapt to a co-parent. That is not the case. Even breastfeeding babies do adapt to alternate caregivers. They're a little bit fussier at bedtime, and at night they can sometimes adapt more easily for naps. But both Neha and I have had co-parents who have been equally involved, who have handled bedtime, who have handled night wakings, who have walked our children to sleep, even though our babies were breastfed. So it definitely can be done. If you're a family where the father hasn't been involved for several months and would now like to get involved, then our advice to you would be consistency and patience. Right? So baby steps. Let the father be around. Let the father do the bedtime routine and then hand over to the mom for feeding. If, very often at bedtime, the mom will be nursing, then walking, then is it possible that the mom does the nursing and the dad does the walking? The mom stays in the room. Is it possible that the dad just kind of lies there while the mom is doing the nursing? So it has to be baby steps. The baby has to get used to the idea that the father or the alternate caregiver is around where sleep is concerned. It should not be forced. If anything is forced, the baby is going to resist it more. So it needs to be done very gently and very respectfully. And I would also ask the alternate caregivers, the dads, to not take it personally, right? Because the baby may scream and cry and reject, but it's not you. It's just that babies do sometimes have a parent preference, and trust me, we've been at it's in our case, it's often been the reverse as well. You know, where the child has had a strong preference for the father and has rejected us, and that's okay. It does sting a little bit, but don't take it personally. It's perfectly okay. What the baby is doing is developmentally appropriate, and we have to just be very consistent and patient. If we feel rejected, or if we feel, you know what, this is not going to work, or you know what, this baby is too attached to breastfeeding and is never going to accept me, and if you just back off, then it's not going to work. You have to know that, you know, this could take 2 months, this could take 3 months of me consistently being there, but at the end of it, it'll work, right? So as long as you have that kind of long-term perspective, you're consistent and you're patient, it will work. Sometimes babies have phases where they have a strong parent preference. So a baby who has been accepting both parents may suddenly prefer one, and that's okay too. Just hang in there. It's a phase. Stay present with the baby. When the baby is ready, the baby will accept you again.
And I wanted to add, for older children, children are very, very perceptive, and children tend to want to go to sleep, go to bed with the primary caregiver and the person that they trust the most. So if the parent has generally been absent from, say, meal times, or, diaper changes, bath time, anything where, or even playtime, anything where the child can feel a closeness and a connection with the parent, and say the father has been largely absent, it's going to be very hard for the child to accept that then the father would be putting him or her to bed. So it's very important that the father begins to pitch in with everything. So through the day, I would even recommend taking a few days off work, maybe, or using your weekends to be with the child all the time, so the child begins to trust you and begins to believe that yes, you can take care of him or her, and that so that the child can feel secure enough to fall asleep in your arms.
That's such an important answer, because the connection between sleep and attachment is very, very deep. And until there's secure attachment, I don't think anyone has a prerogative to put a child to sleep. So the child has to give us that license. And it only happens if there is a secure attachment relationship in place. Now, the last question comes from Raj, Smith and Hina. They want to know, how do you not feel overwhelmed with sleep schedules, awake windows and the like as a new parent, especially during the first 8 months or so when the baby is on multiple naps? Neha, Himani, would either of you like to take this?
Sure. This question again is something that comes to us very often and absolutely understandable. I can imagine, and we've all been through it. Just struggling with our own work routines, and then to think about our child's sleep routines can seem extremely overwhelming. But then again, having done this for 7 years, I can say with absolute certainty that it is a routine that actually keeps you sane. Without a routine, there would be utter chaos. Can you imagine trying to figure out your meetings and your work day, and the help coming in and out with a child who's who just falls asleep whenever and wherever? I mean, everything would just be completely chaotic. So I think that the challenge here is actually accepting that children do need routines. The moment you accept the fact that you do need to work around a child's routine, it stops being that overwhelming, and it's really a mindset that needs to change, which will help us actually then plan our days better. And it is the presence of a routine, an age appropriate routine, that again changes every few months. So you have to be a little flexible as well. But it is actually a routine that helps you from becoming overwhelmed. I mean, I can't imagine having, navigating so many different things through the day if I didn't know what time my baby was going to sleep. So yeah, I think it's really, the most important thing is to first accept and be planned. you do need to plan, and you do need to have a support system in place that will actually feed into those routines. So that, because a child's routine is not a one person job. You need everything to fall in place. It's like a puzzle, right? So you need those various things to fall in place day after day, which will help you actually navigate the often choppy waters of baby sleep.
Such a good answer.
I'd just like to add here that, very often this feeling of being overwhelmed comes not from the baby and the needs of the baby, but from social pressures around you and a lot of the chatter that you hear, right? So, if it's just the primary unit, whether it is the parent, the mother and the baby, or the two parents and the baby, and everyone is in sync and everyone understands, and is letting the baby lead, there isn't much conflict. The conflict arises when there are people around you saying, I need, when are you going to do your chores? Or, why are you holding the baby? Or let the baby sleep wherever, or you're giving the baby a bad habit. If you hear a lot of this, this causes a dissonance, and this causes a lot of stress. If you just kind of submit to the baby and there's a certain level of acceptance, the stress level is a lot lower. And as Neha said, one needs to realize that having a baby is a full-time job. So either you need to do it like a full-time job, or one needs to follow the idea that it takes a village to raise a child, and you need to have enough support so that, whether it's paid work or household chores or parenting or your own time, there are enough people to actually balance out this work. And lastly, something that we explain in great detail in the book is the baby's sleep biology. So, a baby has sleep rhythms. There are homeostatic rhythms, circadian rhythms. There are certain awake windows that the baby has, a certain way in which overtiredness affects a baby. And if you don't respect the baby's sleep rhythms, or if you don't understand the baby's sleep biology and meet the baby's needs, then you're going to just be lost. Then it's going to be like that chaos that Neha was referring to. The baby needs to be parented when where the sleep is concerned, while the baby is sleeping, and also the way the day's routine is working. So if we just accept that sleep parenting is a part of parenting, and yes, parenting in the first year is overwhelming, right? No matter how you do it, it is overwhelming. If we just if we have that level of acceptance and a little bit of support and a little bit of structure, we can ride it out.
I couldn't agree more. And I guess that sense of overwhelm also comes from a sense that you don't have time for yourself, and maybe even carving out 10 minutes a day in the first few months just for yourself, that makes a huge difference to feeling less burdened. And it's an effort, but maybe when a child is napping, if you could just keep 10 minutes for yourself, that would be great. Now, I want to congratulate you on this cover, because it really conveys everything that your book stands for: proximity, warmth, caregiving, love, things that we've come to dissociate with sleep, but that, you attach to sleep all over again. And I'm so glad that you've done that through this cover. I want both of you to answer this question. Give me 3 words that you'd like people to associate with baby sleep. Himani first, then Neha.
Sure, and I'll keep it short. I do want to say, though, that we have a very sort of revolutionary formula in the book, which we call the shared method. I'm not going to get into that. Honestly, read the book to understand, the magic of the shared method. And it's an acronym. So each of the 6 letters actually stands for a tool. I'm actually not. So the 3 words that you're asking for, I'm not going to take them from the shared method either. But the 3 words that I would like to share are dependent. A baby is dependent where sleep is concerned. The second is biology, because sleep is biological, it's not behavioral. we need to understand that. And the third is routine. So as I said, a baby needs a routine, and there are certain sleep rhythms that we need to respect. We need to understand, how homeostatic rhythms, circadian rhythms, awake windows, how all of this actually works. If we do, then it falls into place. So dependent, biology, and routine.
That's brilliant. And Neha?
So of course, I have routines as my first as well. And Himani already explained why. I can't imagine a life without routines. I think we all have routines, and so do babies. I think there is this, misunderstanding that, children shouldn't have routines and they should just adapt to adult routines, which is absolutely not true. Children have their own routines, and actually adults need to adapt to their routines for the period that they are young, till they grow to an adult routine level. My other two words are closeness and empathy. I think nothing bodes better for sleep than closeness, because closeness is sleep and sleep is closeness. It's everything, just being close and being connected and being bonded with your baby makes sleep a dream. It makes sleep so easy that you don't even need to think about it. You don't even need to read a book about sleep if you just stay close to your baby all the time, because then the baby actually gives you all the cues that are inbuilt, really. And my third one is empathy, because I think baby sleep requires an immense amount of empathy on a daily basis, because to really put your own needs aside and think about the baby and where the baby is coming from, and just think about the fact that babies are not crying because they are trying to make life difficult for you. They're not manipulative. They're not being needy or clingy. They're saying something, they're telling you something, and all that comes from your ability to empathize with their needs, their changing needs, which really change every day at every stage. And if you just keep that at the center of your life, then it's just so much easier for everyone. So
what wonderful.
routine.
Yeah. And I think this forms the foundation of so much that your book has within it, right? These 5 words: routine, empathy, proximity. These are words that stand out in your book. And so much is built around this, around routine, around just concern and kindness and gentleness. And it's such a wonderful book. I can't recommend it strongly enough. I hope every parent, even the parent who finds putting a child to sleep easy, I hope every parent reads this book, because there's something that you'll gain from this. And those who are yet to be parents, I think this will make your journey ahead so much easier. A lot of us have struggled through these questions. This book gives us all the answers. Please buy it. It's been such a pleasure talking to you, Neha and Himani. Each time I talk to you, I feel like I take away something invaluable, and it's been this way even during this present conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time out and managing your child's routine and managing your own routine so that you could have this conversation with us. We couldn't think of a better person to, get the ball rolling on this book. And you've been there championing it right from the beginning, before it was even, one word on the page. So thank you so much, Dharini. This means the world to us.
Thank you. And we'll be in touch, of course.